Is there any hope for breaking the censorship cartel's stranglehold on the internet? Long-time oracle of online freedom, Allum Bokhari, says yes. I'm James Polis. Welcome to Zero Hour. Allum Bokhari is an author and investigative reporter who covers tech censorship, dropping scoops on Google, YouTube, Facebook, and more. Now he's the managing director at the Foundation for Freedom Online. Allum, thanks for being here.
Good to be on, James.
So is there not freedom online?
Well, there's more freedom online today than there was in 2020 and 2021. I think those years were the real peak of censorship, but obviously a lot less than when censorship really geared up after the election of Donald Trump in 2016. There were signs it was going to start before that, but that's when things really went up into the next level.
Well, we've got this soft crackdown on any mention of Donald Trump's assassination. Really, if you look at the way that the autocompletes on all the searches, all the search engines show, you get bizarre results. You know, I tried this myself, and you can do it at home and probably have. How bad is it? And are you seeing a snapback? Do you think that just Elon Musk wading in and making X a place where people can say a little bit more than maybe they could before, is that enough? How worried are you?
I think the X thing can't be understated. That's very, very important that there's one major platform where people can get the message out. I think Facebook's a lot better on censorship than they used to be. Obviously, they're still not great. But I think there's a realization in many Silicon Valley companies that they're sort of hoodwinked by the media, and they were hoodwinked by these deep state agencies and their NGO cutouts during the first Trump term, when they were being told, oh, you know, your platforms are flooded with Russian bots, they're flooded with foreign agents, you have to do something. I think they bought that, and they realized that a lot of it was just, they were being taken for a ride by these establishment forces. So I think across Silicon Valley, there's a kind of reluctance to engage with the censorship industrial complex. And in fact, people inside the censorship industrial complex, like Yoel Roth, complain about that. They complain that there's not enough pressure on Silicon Valley companies, that Silicon Valley companies aren't listening to so-called disinformation researchers and pro-censorship journalists anymore. I will say Google is sort of an exception. They've always been, I think, the worst company when it comes to censoring their platform, the worst company when it comes to corporate wokeness in Silicon Valley. So it didn't really surprise me to see that story about them memory holing, apparently, the Trump assassination story in their search results.
So this might be more of like a parlor trick, I don't know, but I think that it's actually helpful to sort of ordinary people trying to keep up because things are unfolding so fast. Can you just kind of give a quick ranking of those major Silicon Valley companies, those major platforms? Who's at the top when it comes to actually maybe letting Americans be America on the internet, and who's closer to the bottom?
Well, of the major ones, I would say Twitter closely vying with Rumble, and I should say X now. X closely vying with Rumble and Substack at the top. I would say Facebook is below that. We often forget the smaller platforms as well. There are platforms that have been heroic over the past, decade or so, providing, maximum levels of free speech. Platforms like Minds, Gab, Odyssey. Of the major ones, I would rank them in that order: X, Rumble, Substack, all sort of generally having a similar attitude towards free speech, I would say. Facebook and Instagram, which are a bit more establishment friendly, and then I would put Google and YouTube somewhere at the bottom.
Well, I think you're right that for a lot of these firms, they really would prefer to just be left alone to kind of make as much money as they can so they can throw those big nerd yacht parties that they love so much. But this is an election year, and there is heightened pressure, and there is a sort of, recognition, I think, among some of those left-leaning or maybe even just diehard left CEOs and C-suite people in Silicon Valley that, this might not be our top preference, but after all, it's looking like we're going to have to force people to decide that Kamala Harris is like a really great choice, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of that at Google and at YouTube. I think we've seen that in the past. We saw that way back in 2016 when, there were leaked emails showing that Google was, paying these get out the vote campaigns in, heavily blue districts. That's one of the many leaks showing, Google's partisan sympathies. So I think we're probably going to be seeing that from Google. I think we're less likely to see that from Facebook. I think Facebook was one of those companies that was very much responsive to pressure, and I think they've grown less afraid of the media and less afraid of those establishment forces that are pushing for censorship. But we might still see it. I mean, that they sort of blow with the wind. So if there's more censorship pressure from governments, especially from the European Union, which is kind of the great hope of the censorship industry, they hope that the European Union, with its sort of massive 10-ton hammer, the Digital Services Act. They're hoping that the pressure of the European Union will force platforms like Facebook and even X to censor Americans over here as well, just to stave off those gigantic EU fines.
Yeah, my working theory on Facebook, and this is, I guess, based in part on some insider knowledge, but is mostly just trying to kind of interpret the archetypes, is Facebook, Zuckerberg, totally blamed and scapegoated for 2016. If it wasn't for you, Trump would never be here and we wouldn't be in this mess. And we're just going to continue to punish you until you finally crack. We're going to make Facebook suck. We're going to force you to get into this sort of weird VR world that isn't very well tested, and you're going to have to try to build a new company there. It's going to be rough. It's going to be costly. It might even be embarrassing. People will make fun of you. And then we're going to make you fork over the Zuckerbucks. You're going to actually have to just keep paying us to win elections in order for us to finally take the boot heel off of your neck. And it does seem like maybe the boot heel has started to come up a little bit. Zuck has not given up. He's sort of skilled up in some ways. There's sort of this personal rebrand thing going on. And yes, I think a lot of people on the right are still very much black-pilled or feeling no love with regard to Zuckerberg, but the story's far from over, and it does seem like he's looking for ways to kind of drift back in the direction where maybe he feels most at home politically.
Yes, the rebrand is certainly interesting. Like his new styling choices, especially. They go viral on Twitter every other. And on all the platforms every other day. But yeah, I think that's accurate analysis. And I remember some of the stories from the first Trump years, when there was sort of max pressure on Facebook and on Zuckerberg, and people were sort of hoping he would step down. I remember writing a story about Wired had published an article saying, well, if Zuckerberg steps down, then the next CEO of Facebook should be a woman, and it should be Catherine Mayer. So the literal Wikipedia deep state CIA
Who better?
later. Yes,
right.
Yeah, just one woman in particular, not like Sheryl Sandberg or anyone else. They specifically named Catherine Mayer and no other woman.
Only she counts.
Yes, I remember there were even stories that Hillary Clinton wanted to be CEO of Facebook at one point. Yeah,
of course. If Ariana Huffington can worm her way into Uber, then surely Hillary could become CEO of Facebook.
Yeah, I think there was also a sense of betrayal because you go back to 2012 and Zuckerberg and Facebook are sort of heroes to the media and heroes to the Democrats because it was seen as having helped elect Barack Obama for a second term.
Oh, it was Obama. It was the Arab Spring.
Yeah.
It was, this is, you go back to that infamous MIT tech review cover that it's just like Bono's face, and it's like how big data will save politics, and the 360, well, I guess 180 degree turn that they executed.
Yeah, the
really
glowing headlines. I remember there was a Guardian headline for when something like Facebook the 2012 election and the power of friendship. So that's the kind of headline you got about Facebook after the 2012 election. You compare those to the headlines they were getting after the 2016 election, obviously polar opposites.
Well, and now you look today, and those bonds of friendship within Silicon Valley, or at least collegiality, have really started to come apart. I mean, we're starting to see open warfare between sort of big tech and self-styled little tech companies, which are big from the perspective of ordinary Americans, but they're not Google, they're not Apple, they're not Microsoft. It's almost like we're really beginning to see a kind of civil war within Silicon Valley. There seems to be internecine conflict everywhere else in American politics on the right and the left. So why not in Silicon Valley too? What do you make of this? Do you think that this kind of Trump-aligned tech revolt in Silicon Valley is real? Do you think they're going to be able to get out from under the shadow of those big firms?
I do think I think there's really been a sea change in tech. You go back to 2016, there was sort of just Peter Thiel, right? And everyone else was staying quiet. I think some people supported Trump in 2016 as well. In fact, I know some of the people in Silicon Valley did support Trump in 2016. But really, people like Thiel were the only, a very, very small number of people were the only ones brave enough to actually say it openly. I think that what's changed is people who always kind of sympathized a little bit with the right, with libertarian values. There's always been that strain in Silicon Valley, are now more comfortable declaring their sympathies openly. And I think there was also a sense among, some companies that, if they played along with the censorship complex, if they played along with the media, they'd be rewarded. There wouldn't be so much regulation. The boot would come off their necks a little bit, as you put it. And that hasn't happened. The opposite has happened. So I think there's a sense that they were sort of led astray by the establishment, that they were hoodwinked, that they were lied to about the Russian troll problem in particular. And I think there's just a less naivety now about dealing with the government and dealing with the Democrats and the media.
Yeah, it's almost like the ultimate experiment in the laboratory of democracy is what happens when a libertarian actually has to do something, actually has to seize a leadership position and take dramatic action in order to, go on having a good time. And that's kind of been like the Elon Musk character arc, right? This is a guy, he was focused on, making the money, but doing it with a sort of style. I think it was Thiel who said that he was the best marketer in the world, and to not bet against Elon Musk. And I think those two concepts are very interrelated, and that Musk, put a lot of energy, obviously, into kind of just appearing to be the man who was an accurate reflection of the culture with all of its craziness and irreverence. And that was really, turbocharged. It wasn't just like scoring those sweet, sweet government contracts, although that's always part of the mix when you're in tech. And then what happened? Well, he found himself in a position where he had some latent power and had some money to kick around that, even the ordinary sort of VC didn't really have. And people started coming to him, people in his inner circle saying like, perhaps you need to do something. I think you're quite right that it can't be underestimated, the impact of his decision to go ahead and actually do something. Obviously, not just in the way that Twitter became X and all that entailed, but as a kind of symbol or, as a kind of a new model of leadership coming out of Silicon Valley, where it's not just saying like, we're going to turn you into gods and it's going to be awesome. And it's not just saying like, we're going to, make sure that the Navy doesn't sink because we can create drones or whatever. Sales pitches that we've heard before, and there's some truth to them or whatever. It does allow people to sort of skill up, and it allows the military-industrial complex to skill up. But of course, you can still have this kind of rainbow flag police state. Even under those conditions, Musk is at least gesturing. Or even
export the rainbow flag police
that's
state.
Right. Yeah, Musk is gesturing toward something different, and I think on the right there's still some concerns that it's all just to get his chip in your head or whatever. But I do think it is more complex than that, because it does have that kind of knock-on effect. You do have these other significant guys, VCs, founders, saying, you know what, like I'm Trump and I'm proud, and that's a huge change.
Yeah, and it is very significant because obviously, historically speaking, it's almost unheard of for any sort of significant change to the ruling establishment to occur without a significant number of elites breaking away from that establishment. And I think what we see in Silicon Valley is a new set of elites emerging that the establishment tried to bring them into the fold, but that hasn't seemed to have worked out, and it seems to be sort of falling apart, that alliance between Silicon Valley and DC, the old and the new. And I think we see that with Bitcoin as well. We see a growth of a new financial elite that isn't tied into the old financial elite and their power networks.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about Bitcoin for a couple of reasons. I mean, the criticism that you do get out of the right, and I think it's understandable for a few reasons, is gosh, just at the moment that it seems like we actually have a shot at taking power and trying to bring America back to what it was, or at least maybe forward into something that is at least going to be an improvement. Here come these rich technology guys. They're not real conservatives or real MAGA. They're just kind of recognizing that they have an opportunity that they can't have if they try to just go along with the Democrats. They're going to be frozen out of power. It's going to be Lena Khan and Elizabeth Warren and all these people who are skeptical of tech. So they're flooding into the right, and they're going to define it, and they're just going to take control of all the memes and all the talking points, and really that good old-fashioned right-wing agenda is just going to kind of get lost in this idea that no, like cool tech bros are going to rule now, and it's going to be awesome. What do you make of that? Do you think that there's a real tension there, or do you think that ultimately grumbling right-wingers are going to line up behind a sort of Trump 2.0 world that is really driven more by that tech agenda than by, the ghost of Pat Buchanan?
Sure. I mean, you always have to worry about opportunists whenever there's a new political trend, right? People are going to jump on that and try and profit from it. I do think that the risks of coming out as pro-Trump, even now, compared to 2016, make that argument about opportunism a little less powerful, because it's still a big risk to come out and say you support Trump, or you oppose the Democrats, especially if you're in Silicon Valley and you have to rely on all these other things, like from payment processors to advertising. We'll talk about advertising later, to the media. You'll get bad press as well. I do think there's always been a genuine, not necessarily conservative, but certainly a libertarian streak in Silicon Valley. And a lot of you go back to the 1990s, a lot of the platforms that were being created back then were being created in response to centralized media and centralized companies. They're very anti-corporation, anti-centralization. And the whole idea of social media was to give initially, and this was the sort of message, was to give everyone a voice. Mm-hmm. YouTube's slogan was broadcast yourself. Mm-hmm. Twitter said it was the free speech wing of the free speech party. They did actually believe that at some point. Mm-hmm. But then they were just relentlessly pressured after 2016, both from the outside, by media companies and advertisers and governments, and also from the inside, from their wokest employees. So they had to resolve that conflict both within their own companies and decide how they were going to deal with all this external pressure before they could even think of going back to their original libertarian values, which I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley, continued to hold. They were just they were sort of just pushed into the background in the first Trump term. Yeah,
well, it's also been interesting too from a kind of political theory standpoint. My grad school is showing here a little bit. That it's easy to say that you have libertarian values before you actually kind of get some power, and then they're put to the test. Well, like, what do you mean really? Do you mean that, and we got this out of Zuckerberg, at least in one of his earlier incarnations, which was, there's no reason for anyone to pretend to be anyone other than who they really are on the internet. Facebook is a place where you can be yourself, and in fact, where you have to be yourself, because if you're like just a cool, ordinary person, you have nothing to hide. We're all friends here. This can be open, and this is kind of where truth comes from, and where money comes from, and productivity and energy and flourishing. So, don't worry about having pseuds or being anonymous on Facebook. That's all stupid. It's just going to be a one-to-one. The future is you are who you are on the internet, just like you are in real life. That's one kind of instantiation of libertarianism that we got. Yeah. Another one was, no, actually, it's really important that everyone is anonymous, or everyone can be anonymous. Information doesn't have a sort of personal identity, so why should you, if you're on the internet, you should be more like information. That kind of influenced kind of where we are with Bitcoin. And then you get this kind of third version of libertarianism, which is, well, you can be anonymous if you want to, but that's really not optimal in the same way that being stuck being yourself isn't optimal. You should be able to be pseudonymous. And in fact, you should be able to have like all these different kind of identities that spawn on the internet. So all of these things have kind of been put to the test. And I know that now, in your current incarnation, you've been working on this stuff not just from a kind of journalistic or kind of political policy angle, but also just from a tech angle. So you've been involved in creating an app that allows people to experience the internet in more of a pure anonymous way. Maybe you can talk a little bit about why you made that choice and where kind of that project stands.
Yeah, so last year I did some work with Futo Technologies, which is a company down in Austin.
That's FUTO, right?
FUTO, yes, and they produce a lot of apps that are anti-censorship and sort of open source adjacent. And one of the apps I helped them design is called Harbor, and you can find it at harbor.social. It's in a sort of beta stage at the moment if you want to download it and play around with it. And it's essentially a decentralized verification platform. And it allows any user to verify any claim made by another user of the app. So I was thinking of it, coming from a journalistic background, I was thinking of it in terms of anonymous sources. If someone wanted to say, well, I work at Google and I want to post about my experiences at Google, but I need to prove I work at Google, they could go to someone who has some sort of reputation or authority in verifying sources. They use the app to give them the verification, and then they have that verification forever. It's much like a blockchain. You have it tied to your private key. No one can take it away from you once you've been verified. You could then link to that on social media, and that will prove that you work at Google. As long as you trust whoever does the verifying, then you can trust that the anonymous source is who they say they are. And you don't have to use your email address or your phone number or anything else that links back to your personal identity. So it's kind of a way to build networks of expertise and networks of credentialed people who don't necessarily use their real names and faces. Because when I was thinking about it, it was like, you need to be able to organize people in public, but non-establishment forces have a huge disadvantage there, because when they come out in public and use their real name and their real face, they instantly become a target.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to be a public elite than it is to be a sort of random person on the internet.
Right. I mean, you look at James Damore, exactly what happened to him, right? So how do you organize James Damore's without exposing their identities? That's what I was thinking about. And this app is the technology that allows that to happen. Cancel culture's sort of at a low ebb right now, I would say, but it could come back. And I think it's important to have technologies that allow people to speak out and to, blow the whistle on things going on at their companies and organize and find like-minded people, no matter what organization or community that they're in. But obviously they need a way to find people who are like them and people who are part of those same communities. So you need verification to do that.
Right. I think it is essential to just remember, as news comes and goes and centuries pass in what seems like centuries pass in days, they're trying to scrub the Trump assassination and the things are moving so fast. It's very, very easy to see how cancel culture and censorship and all the rest can come roaring back. I saw some chatter on X where, people kind of taking pot shots at the red PFP guys with the blue laser eyes, saying like, oh, just like Silicon Valley to like buy in at the top of the market. They waited for Trump to kind of peak, and that's when they piled in with their support. And it kind of did look like that for like 3 days, maybe 4 days. And now we're in a world where, the propaganda blitz for Kamala is just getting started, where all of the work of the machine, trying to consolidate the support and figure out ways to just keep that megaphone right up against everyone's ear, just like shouting the messaging to them. This isn't the top for Trump, and it is a big risk for these guys to step forward and to make those associations and to say that they're going to back him. So
if any of them were treating it like a meme coin, then they definitely got rugged.
Yes. Right. And so here we are. It's definitely not the end of the fight. We can't count on things to just kind of taper off and go back to 1996 or whatever the magic time is that's still in everyone's heads. And so this app, I'm not gonna accent police you for the rest of the show, I promise. But it's HARBOR.
Yes, harbor.social.
Right? Okay,
That's where you can find it.
Yes, we live in a world where Silicon Valley and all the tech people are just making up words with like 4 or 5 letters in them all the time. So I just want to make sure people know where they're going.
Yes, and it's sort of like a hedge against, if you can be black-pilled or white-pilled, but it's a hedge against cancel culture getting worse. That's when you might need like a LinkedIn for anons, which is essentially what the app is.
Yeah, well, the head of LinkedIn is just one of the very worst offenders when it comes to giving in to the woke Borg or whatever you want to call it. But we should also talk about where the censorship is coming from, the call coming from inside the house, so to speak. You guys at FFO, you got a report coming out soon. I received privileged information telling me that this was going to happen. Basically taking a look at, where's the censorship? Well, it's coming from these advertising groups. And we saw a little bit of this out in kind of ordinary America, sort of bubbling up to the level of kind of ordinary news, where Elon Musk was running into trouble with these advertisers. And at first it just seemed like, well, there are going to be some woke companies and maybe they're not so comfortable. But no. This was just the tip of the iceberg. There's something much more sophisticated and nefarious going on that wasn't just isolated companies sort of making their own decisions, but whole networks that are really plugged into the U.S. government. So what can you tell us? How much can you tell us? And what are you looking forward to doing in this area with FFO?
Yeah, so there'll be a big report on this, probably multiple, in fact. Might be out on our site by the time this episode goes live, foundationforfreedomonline.com. So, the advertising industry has always, I think, been the greatest ally of online censors.
And why is that?
Because they're just very afraid of controversy. So when someone sends an email to an advertiser saying your advertiser is appearing next to this article or this Twitter post or this YouTube video, and I don't like this YouTube video and I won't buy your product anymore, they actually take that seriously. And when lots of people do it, then they take it even more seriously. And when a big media company does it, then they just freak out and pull all of their advertisers from whichever platform or website is being targeted. And this has happened multiple times, even before, the Trump years, when the very earliest pushes towards online censorship, driven by sort of feminist activists and woke activists in the early 2010s, during the Great Awakening. Even then, you see organizations and activist groups pressuring advertisers to pressure Facebook. They want Facebook to take down these meme pages that offend them, so they go to Facebook's advertisers and ask Facebook's advertisers to talk to Facebook. It's always been seen as a source of pressure on the tech industry in particular, because the tech industry and social media platforms were initially, at least, completely dependent on the ad revenue model. It's gotten a little better now because there are more subscription options. Twitter has a subscription option. Substack, entirely subscription, which is why they've been able to resist censorship pressure. There are more revenue options today, but advertising is still a massive one. So this is why the censorship industry has always targeted the advertisers. It's always tried to whip up these ad boycotts. And the advertising industry has gone along with it because they've won because, they're old school corporations. Most of their executives are, woke and liberal themselves, so they naturally sympathize with this. Two, because a lot of them have media backgrounds, mainstream media backgrounds, again, makes them ideologically sympathetic to the cause of censorship. And three, because, controversy actually can be bad for brands and the media can manufacture controversies. So what the advertising industry did in 2019 is they set up an organization called the Global Alliance for Responsible Media.
Classic corporate move to cartelize.
Yes, and it is literally a cartel. It makes up, it was created by the World Federation of Advertisers, which represents approximately 90% of all advertising spend worldwide. So this is like a giga cartel. It's massive. It's the entire advertising industry. And this organization they created, GARM, exists entirely to pressure social media companies to have uniform content standards. So they say it right there on their website. They want a brand safety floor, is what they call it. And if you fall through the brand safety floor, you're not getting any advertising revenue. We're going to financially throttle you.
And let me guess, this is all being shaped and controlled by the very largest players in the industry.
Of course, yes. So, the advertising industry can pretty much be boiled down to 6 global advertising agencies. There's WPP, there's Publicis Group, which created NewsGuard. You're probably familiar with NewsGuard. Yes, they led the seed round. There's Omnicom, there's IPG, there's a Japanese one called Dentsu, and there's Havas. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And 4 out of those big 6 agencies have billions of dollars in US government contracts. So not only are these advertising agencies, which are all leading members of GARM, one of which created NewsGuard through seed funding, and one of their executives still sits on NewsGuard's board of directors. NewsGuard obviously is this media blacklisting entity that I assume they have Blaze on the blacklist. They have most conservative media on a blacklist. Not only are these companies mass boycotting Twitter in an effort to get Twitter/X to roll back its commitment to free speech. Not only did they boycott Facebook in 2020, it was a mix of brands, but it was advertising revenue pulling out from Facebook in 2020 because they wouldn't censor Trumpian disinformation. Not only are they creating these massive censorship cartels like GARM, but the U.S. taxpayer has to fund it.
Right. And so what are these government contracts then?
Everything from military recruitment to public health announcements. It'll all be in our article. But you probably remember, that woke army recruitment ad that was produced by one of these advertising that came out, I think, 2022, 2023. The animated one. It was called The Calling. The army. It featured a female recruit who was going to all these woke rallies, and then she joined the army.
That's right.
You remember that one?
Yes.
Right. That was produced at the U.S. taxpayer expense by one of these advertising companies that is also part of this global censorship cabal.
Amazing.
So I do think if you can find a way to deal with this advertising censorship problem, then you can solve a lot of the censorship problem itself, because all of the NGOs and the activist groups and the journalists who push for censorship, they have no teeth unless they can either generate advertising boycotts on the one hand, or EU-style censorship regulations. But EU-style censorship regulations, they take a long time. The bureaucracies they create are quite slow to move. Advertising boycotts can happen within 24 hours of a negative news story. So that's why they again go to the advertisers and say you have to pull out from these platforms.
So the narrative that emerged through the Twitter files that most people who care at all about free speech and being American on the internet was the narrative of, okay, it's the deep state, it's the intelligence community pressuring these social media companies to do things that directly undermine our guaranteed constitutional freedoms. Sure, some of those, there might be some folks in there like a Yoel Roth or whoever who are actively cheering this on and want to see that kind of censorship take place anyway. And not
Although
just censorship.
I will say, just to interject there, even Yoel Roth, as woke and as pro-censorship as he is, recognized that some of what he was being fed by these NGOs was nonsense. Like you see in some of the emails, he's saying, well, these aren't Russian bots, these are Americans.
Right.
Like, what are we doing here? Even Yoel Roth realized he was being hoodwinked.
Naivety still at that level. But so most of the time it was, it's the government's the baddie, the government's the one who is basically almost nationalizing all of the social media companies so that there is this kind of one standard of who can say what. What you're describing is something different, where the arrow is kind of going in the other direction. And what that suggests is that there actually are important, maybe even essential ways of fighting back for the restoration of those constitutional freedoms that doesn't involve basically saying, CIA, FBI, NSA, these are the bad guys. They've taken over the government, and we need to kind of go to war with the USG in order to bring the Constitution back.
Yeah, well, I think the governments certainly play a role, and around the world as well. That's another source of pressure on Silicon Valley, and the censorship industry is. When I say the censorship industry, I mean like the global network of disinformation researchers, of pro-censorship journalists, and so forth. They've always been very pro-government regulation and pro-governments getting involved to push for censorship. So that mustn't be discounted. But obviously, in the United States' case, the government's fairly limited in terms of what it can do. It can still send angry emails to tech companies saying, you got to take down this COVID disinformation, which they did. And a lot of tech companies caved into that. But, there is this private sector pressure as well from the advertising industry, which is also very, very important. And I think it's also important to realize that when organizations like GARM get together and when advertising agencies and their representatives reach out to these social media platforms and say there's a brand safety risk, it's important to interrogate that, like what they actually mean by brand safety. And are they being entirely honest when they talk about brand safety, or are they in an ideological echo chamber, and is their idea of brand safety simply things that offend them, the advertising executives?
Sure.
Because you look at some of the PR disasters the brand disasters of the last half decade or so, that have actually cost brands billions of dollars and generated mass consumer boycotts. It's not things like, a brand's ad appeared next to a Twitter post of someone saying the N-word. That's never generated a consumer boycott.
That did not drop Bud Light from number one to number three.
No, it was the Bud Light ad that cost Anheuser-Busch billions of dollars. It was Gillette's toxic masculinity ad back in 2019 that had generated a mass boycott against Gillette. I mentioned that Army ad. The Army had to turn off comments under the YouTube video because it generated such a backlash. So when these advertising executives say, well, we need to be able to withdraw ads from social media platforms and from media websites because of brand safety, we need to be asking, is their idea of brand safety really accurate?
Yeah, well, I can see at least two scenarios here, right? And scenario one is kind of what you're describing, which is I'm a woke CEO of a leading advertising agency. I consider myself to have a great degree of global power. I have friends who are just like me, who are also CEOs of major advertising agencies, who also think that, if we unite together, we can rule the world for good, of course, always for good. And so we characterize it much in the same way that, legacy Twitter was like, oh, this is trust and safety. This is what we're doing. We are taking away your account and we are helping you get thrown in jail for saying bad memes on the internet for your safety. And you need to trust us that we know what is good for you better than you do. There's that model, right? And we can maybe talk about who these executives are, where they came from, where maybe they're going. Is there some kind of revolving door there with advertising and with other sort of arms of that NGO verse that plays such a big role? NGOs are the new government organizations, and so that's kind of model one. Model two is maybe in some ways a little more charitable, which is, let's say that I'm just a kind of I get airdropped into one of these agencies. I'm a well-meaning corporate CEO. I've worked hard. I care about, maybe the safety of the brand, but maybe even more so the safety of my company. And let's face it, the internet has done a lot to damage media organizations. It's done a lot to throw business models into chaos. Across entertainment, we see this going on in Hollywood right now, across legacy media organizations, whether it's a Fox News or a CNN, they all kind of have to grapple with this stuff. And so inevitably, the pace of technological change has thrown the future of advertising, media advertising, into a certain kind of doubt. And when you find yourself in a climate like this one, maybe not just for diehard rainbow flag reasons, you're saying to yourself, we kind of have to be in the propaganda business a little bit, because if we're just doing down the line, shut up and dribble, only the product, are we really going to have a viable business model if we just do that? Sure, we'll be able to make some money, but if you look at what the big media behemoths are doing, well, everyone's kind of trying to figure out what the future holds. Maybe that's true for advertising too. Oh no, what if traditional advertising is going to be obsolete? It's not going to be Don Draper anymore. It's not going to be what it once was, where you're creating these visions of a cool world that someone can participate in if only they sniff the right fragrance or buy the right product. Maybe, digital technology is in some fundamental way kind of undermining that whole world of TV and imagination that used to be so powerful. What are we going to do? Well, one thing that we can do is we can kind of force people to think in a certain way, and maybe by providing that service, we can extend the lifespan of the industry. Do you think that that kind of thing might be going on, or is it really just like a handful of ideological executives trying to flex on the rest of the country?
I think there might be some machinations going on. So to go back to Publicis Group, one of these big advertising agencies, as I said, they did the seed funding for NewsGuard. One of their executives, I think the lead executive for Europe, is on NewsGuard's board of directors. And NewsGuard is this organization that builds, it's their terminology, not mine. They build blacklists and whitelists of favored and disfavored news sources. And, there have been studies, I believe the Media Research Center did one, showing that, the news sites that get positive ratings are almost overwhelmingly establishment, and very, very few conservative sources get positive ratings by comparison. Now, interesting thing about Publicis Group, a lot of their clients are pharmaceutical companies. Pfizer, Purdue, they actually had to pay a fine recently, a big fine in New York, because they did work with Purdue marketing opioids in the United States.
Great.
Sanofi, which also makes a COVID vaccine along with Pfizer. They're heavily in the pharmaceutical industry. So isn't it convenient that they funded this news rating organization that happens to give really negative news scores and label as unreliable many websites that criticize the pharmaceutical industry, Publicis Group's clients?
Right.
So it strikes me that that made sense as an investment for Publicis Group for very reasons that on the face of it look very shady to me. But so there were some machinations going on there. But I think, again, this is an old world industry. These are companies that have been around for decades, sometimes in some cases nearly a century, and they think in a very they're not like Silicon Valley libertarian elites who think a little bit differently to sort of the East Coast elites. They're still in the Democrat bubble. They're still in the establishment media bubble. They still believe they probably bought Russiagate at face value. They probably still think Russian agents stole the 2016 election. I've actually talked to former executives inside one of the big advertising agencies, and he said, "Yeah, they're just completely partisan. The whole industry is." So it's also an ideological bubble effect going on, as well as maybe some machinations as well.
Well, this really brings up for me what I think is kind of at least one frontier of all of this, which is this relationship between big pharma and tech. Some of these tech guys, yes to the vaccines, yes to hard biotech, invade the body with invisible computers. This is the future. This is how we win. It's all good. If people want to block their hormones, or they want to become super strong, or they want to have an Olympics where everyone's doping, like, awesome, bring it on. This is kind of all that's left for us to do. We did sort of more primitive forms of capitalism. We speed ran the industrial age, and now the future is just kind of a post-human explosion of biotech. But you have other tech guys, take a look at Elon Musk. Yes, he wants to put a chip in your head, his chip anyway, but he's also out there saying, like, they transed my son and now he's dead and this is a nightmare and it must come to an end. There is friction here between the big pharma agenda, which is everyone should be on every drug all the time, no matter what, no matter if it makes them better or makes them worse or whatever, as long as it's us just fundamentally altering their physiognomy or their physiological makeup, it's good. And then you got tech guys who are like, well, maybe there are some applications of technology that are bad because they're bad for people. That seems like a real tension. And then if you bring the advertisers, the advertiser's job there is to make things that are bad for you look good. Yes, actually, no. All these side effects, don't worry about them. This is perfectly safe. It's going to improve your quality of life. The advertising becomes a form of marketing. And so I'm wondering, are you tracking this at all? Are you seeing anything in these kind of, at this nexus of where tech and pharma and advertising comes together? Are you seeing tensions? Are you seeing kind of some pushback against the idea that anything that is a pharmaceutical application of technology is good and needs to be aggressively pushed out to the masses?
Yeah, well, I think NewsGuard is that nexus, frankly. And, maybe when Publicis Group invested in NewsGuard, they were just thinking, oh, we just want to support responsible media and trusted media. We want a trusted media ecosystem. That's why we're investing it. And, we're not thinking about our pharma clients at all. Except they did later on specifically partner with NewsGuard on something called HealthGuard, which was specifically to address so-called vaccine disinformation. Again, this seems to be benefiting Publicis Group's clients quite a bit, which would suggest, which is why they're doing it, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, in a sense, this goes all the way back to sort of Tony Fauci's experience at the front lines of the whole AIDS thing. And he flipped. Initially he was not very warm to the idea of presenting HIV as this kind of national problem that everyone had to care about, and we all needed to find the cure or whatever. But he did flip, and that kind of flip, I think, probably began this era of big pharma is not just something that exists or something that we have to put up with, or maybe some good things. These people are heroes. They are the ones who are coming up with the cures for all of these things that ail us. And, we need to recognize that the more that we move toward a world in which there is a cure for everything, and there's a drug for everything.
Yeah,
the more we move in that direction, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, and I think that's the extremist position, right? I think the moderate position is some good things, obviously, a lot of good things, maybe mostly good things, right. What the pharmaceutical industry does. But then there are awful things like the opioid crisis.
And that's another industry that's also been incredibly consolidated.
Yeah. So you need to have open debate about pharmaceutical companies, and I'm sure NewsGuard will be able to point to one or two examples of news websites that are critical of the pharmaceutical industry and who they give a positive rating to. But I'm sure if you look at the balance, there are probably going to be way more anti-pharma news sites on their blacklist than pro-pharma news sites.
Yeah. All right, so we got a few minutes left. Handicap this for us. Obviously, you're involved in trying to break the stranglehold here. Do you think you're going to succeed? Do you think that things are going to get choppy over the next, certainly just through the election season and on to the inauguration? I'm not going to ask you to give me your prediction on who's going to end up president of the United States, but just kind of overall, you're in the thick of the fight. Are you feeling optimistic?
Overall, I think we're in a much better spot than in 2016 with regards to censorship. I think 2016 was one of the worst years ever for online censorship. Not 2020, my mistake. But now we have one platform that's pretty open, X. We've got Rumble, we've got Substack, we've got all of these free speech friendly platforms out there. So, the media barricades can be broken. There's more open debate than there was.
Well, and just in terms of, outside media when it comes to elected representatives or influential tech personalities.
There's just way more of that. And as far as things are going with the censorship industry, I think they're on the back foot. They're still very powerful. They still have the EU on their side. The fight's not over by any means. And then there's the advertising industry as well. Still this massive force out there that is pushing for censorship. So, stay tuned on that.
Allum Bokhari, we will definitely stay tuned. We will be watching. Keep it up, and thanks.
Thanks, James.
All right, that's all the time we got. Till next time around. So thank you again to Allum, and until then, I'm James Polis. This is Zero Hour. May God have mercy on us all.